Some events don't simply fade with time. Across the United Kingdom, there have been moments that were investigated, documented, and in some cases officially recorded, yet never fully explained. Incidents involving trained personnel, disappearances in isolated locations, and situations where the evidence didn't quite match the conclusions. What makes these cases stand out isn't just what happened, but what remained unresolved afterwards. Because even when reports are written, witnesses are interviewed, and timelines are reconstructed, some details still don't fit. And when those gaps remain, they tend to raise more questions than answers. There are places history tried to forget, and stories that were never meant to be told. But the deeper you look, the harder they are to ignore. This is Behind Truths. The lighthouse where 3 men disappeared, and nothing was ever found out of place. Scotland, on a remote group of islands off the west coast of Scotland, a lighthouse was built to guide ships through one of the most dangerous stretches of sea in the region. Isolated, exposed to harsh weather, and surrounded by powerful waves, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse was not a place where anything unusual was expected, only routine, discipline, and precision. In December 1900, that routine was broken. A supply ship approaching the island noticed something immediately off. The lighthouse, which should have been active, showed no visible response, no signal, no sign that anyone was attending it. When a relief keeper was sent ashore, what he found raised more questions than answers. The lighthouse was empty. All 3 keepers assigned to the station, experienced men familiar with the conditions, were gone. Inside, however, things didn't suggest panic. The beds were unmade, as expected during duty shifts. A meal appeared to have been left unfinished. Personal belongings were still there. There were no clear signs of struggle, no damage, no indication that anything sudden had occurred inside the building. But outside, there were details that didn't quite fit. Reports mentioned severe weather in the days before, yet official logs from the mainland didn't fully match the intensity described locally. Some equipment appeared displaced, suggesting strong forces at work. But again, nothing conclusive. One of the most discussed details was the final log entries. They described unusual conditions, strong winds, tension among the keepers. And then, abruptly, the entry stopped. No explanation, no final note, just silence. Search efforts were carried out, but no trace of the 3 men was ever found, not on the island, not in the surrounding waters. Over time, several explanations have been suggested. A sudden wave may have swept them away while they were working outside. A sequence of events could have led them to leave the lighthouse at the wrong moment, or perhaps conditions shifted faster than expected. All of these are possible, but none of them fully explain every detail. And that is what keeps the incident unsettled. Because when trained professionals disappear from a controlled environment, and the physical evidence remains minimal, the questions tend to linger. What caused all 3 men to leave their post at the same time? Why were there no clear signs of urgency inside? And how does an event like this leave so little behind? More than a century later, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse still stands. But what happened there in 1900 remains incomplete. And if that case left behind unanswered questions, the next one involves something very different. Because this time, the witnesses weren't isolated keepers. They were trained military personnel, and what they reported was officially recorded, but never fully explained. The forest where military personnel reported lights and filed an official report. In late December 1980, near a US Air Force base in Suffolk, something unusual was reported in the nearby woodland of Rendlesham Forest. Unlike many accounts that rely solely on second-hand descriptions, this incident involved trained military personnel, individuals accustomed to observing, documenting, and responding to unexpected situations. It began with reports of strange lights seen descending into the forest during the night. Believing it could have been an aircraft in distress, A small group was sent to investigate. As they moved through the trees, they reported seeing a bright, structured light source deeper within the forest, not scattered or distant, but contained, low to the ground, and clearly visible. According to the accounts, the light appeared to move, at times partially obscured by the trees, then visible again from a different angle, as if shifting position. Some described it as having a defined shape. Others focused more on the intensity and movement. What stands out is not the exact description, but the consistency that followed. The event did not end that night. Over the next few days, additional observations were reported. Lights seen again, this time at a distance. Unusual readings recorded using available equipment, and a growing sense that whatever had been observed was not easily explained. One of the most significant aspects of this case is that a formal memo was later written by a deputy base commander, documenting the events. It didn't attempt to draw a final conclusion. It simply recorded what had been seen, when it occurred, and who was involved. Over time, several explanations have been proposed. Some suggest misidentified lights, perhaps from nearby structures or natural sources. Others point to atmospheric conditions, or the possibility of external activity that was misunderstood in the moment. Each explanation addresses part of the incident, but not all of it, because when multiple trained observers report similar details across different nights, and those observations are formally documented, it becomes more difficult to dismiss the entire event outright. And yet, no definitive conclusion was ever reached. The incident remains one of the most discussed cases of its kind in the United Kingdom, not because of what was proven, but because of what wasn't. Because even with reports, witnesses, and written records, something remained unexplained. And if that raises questions, the next case removes the setting from land entirely. Because this time, the mystery didn't happen in a forest. It happened at sea, on a vessel that was found intact, but completely empty. The ship found adrift, fully intact, but with no one on board. In December 1872, a merchant ship was discovered drifting in the Atlantic Ocean under conditions that, at first glance, didn't suggest anything unusual. The vessel, later identified as the Mary Celeste, was structurally sound. Its cargo was largely untouched. There were no visible signs of damage that would indicate a struggle or a catastrophic event. But there was one detail that changed everything. There was no one on board. The entire crew, including the captain, his family, and several sailors, had vanished. When the ship was inspected, the scene raised more questions than answers. Personal belongings remained in place. Supplies were still available. The ship itself was seaworthy, capable of continuing its journey. There were no clear signs of panic, no obvious evidence of violence, no indication that the crew had attempted to abandon the vessel under immediate threat. And yet, one lifeboat was missing. This suggested that the crew had left the ship voluntarily. But if that was the case, the question becomes far more complicated. Why would an experienced captain abandon a vessel that was still functional? Over time, various explanations have been proposed. Some suggest a possible technical issue, perhaps involving the cargo, which included barrels of industrial alcohol. It's been theorized that fumes or pressure could have created a perceived danger, leading the crew to temporarily evacuate. Others propose environmental factors, rough seas, equipment failure, or navigational uncertainty. Each theory offers part of a possible explanation, but none of them fully account for the condition in which the ship was found, because if the crew had intended to return, something prevented them, and if they did not intend to return, the decision itself raises even more questions. No confirmed trace of the missing individuals was ever discovered. No verified account of what happened after they left the ship. Just a vessel, drifting alone, with everything still in place, except the people. The Mary Celeste became one of the most well-known maritime mysteries in history, not because of what was found, but because of what was missing, and because, even after extensive investigation and decades of analysis, the full story was never established, and if a ship in open water can be found without explanation, the next case brings the mystery back onto land, but in a far more unusual form, because this time it begins not with a disappearance, but with the discovery of something that shouldn't have been there in the first place. The objects found beneath a home and the events that followed were never fully explained. Northumberland, England, in 1971. In the town of Hexham, Northumberland, a routine home improvement led to an unexpected discovery. While working on a property, two small stone objects were uncovered beneath the structure. At first glance, they didn't seem particularly significant, roughly carved, human-like heads, worn and aged, with features that were difficult to clearly define. But it wasn't just what they were, it was what followed after they were brought inside. According to reports at the time, unusual occurrences began shortly after the objects were moved into the home. Nothing dramatic at first, subtle changes, small disturbances, moments that were easy to question or dismiss individually. But over time, the accounts became more specific. Items reportedly moved without clear cause. Sounds were heard in parts of the house where no one was present. And perhaps most notably, there were descriptions of something being seen, briefly, and not always clearly, but enough to be remembered. These reports were not limited to a single moment. They continued, developing into a pattern that drew attention beyond the household itself. Eventually, the objects were examined by individuals with an interest in historical artifacts and unexplained cases. Some suggested they could be of ancient origin. Others believed they might be far more recent. No definitive conclusion was reached. At the same time, attempts were made to document and understand the events reported in the house. As with many cases of this kind, explanations were proposed. Environmental factors, misinterpretation of ordinary occurrences, the psychological impact of an unusual discovery influencing perception. Each of these offers a possible perspective, but none fully accounts for why the reports began when they did, or why they seem to follow the objects themselves. Because when something is introduced into a space, and the environment appears to change afterwards, the connection becomes difficult to ignore, even if it cannot be proven. In time, the objects were removed from the property, and according to later accounts, the disturbances appeared to lessen. Whether that was coincidence, perception, or something else entirely, remains unclear. The Hexham heads remain one of the more unusual cases of their kind in the UK, not because of a single event, but because of the sequence, discovery, reports, and then a return to normality after their removal. And that sequence leaves a question that is still debated. Was it the objects themselves, or the effect they had on those who encountered them? Across this video, we've explored 4 real events connected to the United Kingdom, each one investigated, documented, and yet never fully resolved. A lighthouse where 3 men disappeared without a trace. A forest where military personnel reported something they couldn't explain. A ship found intact, but completely empty, and objects discovered beneath a home, followed by events no one could fully account for. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these cases do you think has the most realistic explanation, and which one feels the hardest to explain? And more importantly, do you think these events are simply the result of incomplete information, or something that was never fully understood? Let me know in the comments. Because sometimes, it's not the lack of answers that makes a story unsettling, it's how much was already known and still didn't explain it.